You don't buy a piece of Freddie Mercury's life without expecting a little strangeness. Or at least that's what I told myself the first night we moved in, when the living room lights flickered exactly 3 times, paused, then steadied as if someone were testing them. The electrician later swore the wiring was newer than the furniture, and the neighbors insisted they'd never seen anything unusual in the house before. But that first night, standing in the half-lit room, I had a very distinct feeling that someone else was walking behind me, even though the house was empty except for our still-unpacked boxes. We had bought the place quietly, without telling friends or family. Too many people would have treated it like a museum or worse, an amusement park. The listing agent was discreet. A well-kept Kensington townhouse previously owned by a notable musician. No names. No plaque. You only knew if you knew. And we knew. The house felt warm in the daytime. Skylights, cream-colored walls, a view of the garden Freddie once filled with imported roses. But when the sun went down, everything sharpened. Sound carried differently. Every footstep felt like it had an echo that didn't belong to you. The air was heavier, not cold or frightening, just inhabited. And it didn't take long before small, rational things stopped being rational. It began with sound. Not voices, not whispers. Something more mundane and therefore harder to explain away. Piano note. Just one. Light, clean, unmistakable. It came from the upstairs music room, where Freddie used to write. At first, I thought the old wooden frame just settled, causing a random vibration. Houses do that. Instruments do that. Perfectly normal. But once you hear a piano key ring out in a silent house, you don't forget it. You wait for it to happen again. It did. 3 nights later. Same note. Same timing. Around 1:40 a.m. I didn't tell my partner. They were already uneasy about the place. Instead, I went upstairs with my phone flashlight, expecting to find an open window or a draft hitting the strings. But the room was warm, the windows sealed, and when I pressed the key that had sounded, nothing happened. It was loose, slightly heavier than the others, almost dead. Couldn't have played on its own. I brushed it off. Tried to, at least. But the next morning, Mrs. Coughlin, the elderly neighbor who'd lived next door since the late 70s, caught me outside and said something that made the back of my neck tighten. "You heard the music, didn't you?" she asked casually, as if asking about the weather. I tried to act normal. "What music?" She gave a small smile, the kind reserved for people who already know the answer. "It's nothing to worry about. He was always practicing at strange hours. Old habits die hard, I suppose." She walked away before I could ask anything else. That night I stayed in the music room on purpose. Laptop open, pretending to work. I wanted to prove to myself that nothing was wrong. That this was all psychological, the stress of moving, the weight of living in a famous man's house, the way old homes breathe differently. Around 2 a.m., the house settled, small cracks, faint creaks. Normal. But then, without warning, every framed photo on the far wall shifted at the same time. Just an inch, making a cluster of soft taps like someone brushing past them. No wind. No vibration. No footsteps. Just that quiet rearrangement, subtle but deliberate. And that was the moment I realized something important. Whatever was happening here wasn't chaotic or violent. It wasn't trying to frighten us. It was patterned, purposeful, almost polite, as though someone who once lived here was checking whether the house still felt like home. Someone who wasn't ready to leave. The next evening I tried to behave as if nothing unusual had happened. We cooked dinner, moved a few more boxes into the hallway, argued lightly about where to place the bookshelves. Every time my partner walked into the kitchen, I caught myself watching the ceiling, listening for footsteps. A shift, a single note from upstairs. I didn't want to hear anything, but the silence felt almost staged, too complete. A house that old should have had more breathing noises, more life. Instead it felt as if someone was holding their breath, waiting for us to move first. When my partner went to bed early, I stayed behind, pretending to clean up. In reality, I was listening. Not for thrills, not out of fascination. It was a kind of responsibility. Now you don't ignore something once it proves itself to you. You pay attention whether you want to or not. It was close to midnight when I heard it. the faint scrape of something wooden shifting upstairs. I froze, dish towel still in my hand. It wasn't loud, wasn't sharp, more like the sound of a chair being pushed back very slowly. I stepped into the hallway and looked up the staircase, half expecting to see a shadow leaning around the banister. Nothing. But the air had a different weight to it, as though the house had just exhaled. I walked upstairs deliberately, making each step slow, giving myself time to turn around if I chickened out. But when I reached the top floor, the air felt oddly calm, like I had arrived too late to catch whatever caused the noise. I touched the brass door handle of the music room. It was slightly warm, as if someone had been holding it moments earlier. Inside, the room was exactly as it had been the night before, except for one detail. The small wooden stool by the piano, an old, low-backed thing with smooth, rounded legs, had been pulled a few inches away from the instrument. Not much, just enough that it looked, unmistakably, as if someone had been sitting on it and gently pushed themselves back before standing up. I didn't move it, didn't touch anything. Instead, I stood there quietly, listening to my own breathing. The house around me was silent, yet I felt watched, not maliciously, not aggressively, but with the kind of quiet curiosity you'd expect from someone observing guests in their old room. Someone who felt protective of these walls. Someone who had never been keen on leaving. The next morning, I found myself seeking answers without admitting that's what I was doing. I visited the little cafe down the street where the older neighbors gathered. They were polite, reserved, but when I mentioned the house, their expressions grew familiar. Not surprised, recognizing. As though my experience was simply the next chapter of a story they already knew. One man, probably in his 70s, spoke softly without looking up from his tea. He was a night owl, practiced all hours, wrote melodies right until dawn. You're living in a place that remembers him more vividly than most people do now. I asked what he meant by that, but he only shrugged. That evening, something changed in the atmosphere of the house. The usual stillness felt charged, not electric, not dangerous, just attentive. As if the house had guessed that I was beginning to understand. I didn't hear the piano this time. Instead, I noticed shadows, not moving, not shifting, just subtly misplaced, like when you see a shape out of the corner of your eye and can't quite confirm it. My partner noticed it, too. They came into the living room while I sat at the table and asked casually, "Did you move that mirror?" I hadn't. But the tall vintage mirror leaning in the hallway had angled itself slightly, just enough to catch the reflection of the staircase instead of the wall. And in that new angle, we both saw something that made my blood run cold. A small handprint. Not sharp, not clear, just the delicate, faint outline of fingers at the bottom corner of the glass. Too small to be ours. Too low to come from either of us. We stared at it for a long time in silence. My partner tried to rationalize it: delivery workers, old dust patterns, smudges from when we carried it upstairs, but none of those explanations fit. The mirror had been wiped down. The glass was spotless. The handprint was new. We didn't touch it, didn't clean it. We simply left the mirror where it stood, facing the stairs, as if removing it would disturb something we weren't ready to confront. And later that night, just as I was drifting off to sleep, the house finally broke its own silence. A soft, unmistakable hum, almost a vibration, almost a breath, echoed faintly through the hallway, followed by a single quiet piano note. Not the same one as before. Higher, clearer, almost like someone testing a melody they hadn't played in decades. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. The next day felt strangely muted, as if the house itself were trying to decide whether it should retreat or reveal more. My partner left early for work, leaving me alone with the quiet rooms and the lingering echo of that single piano note from the night before. I kept convincing myself I should focus on unpacking, setting up the office, doing anything productive, but my attention drifted again and again to the top of the staircase toward the music room. There's a particular kind of silence in old houses that feels almost textured, as if the walls are listening. Every step I took felt too loud. Every drawer I opened felt like it echoed. I kept waiting for something to respond, but the house simply breathed around me with settling. A faint creak here and there, the radiator making small metallic ticks. All normal things, all explainable. And yet, beneath those ordinary sounds, there was something else, like a low undercurrent, a presence watching from just beyond the edge of attention. Around noon, I decided to get out for a walk, hoping distance would make everything feel less claustrophobic. The streets of Kensington were calm, the air cool and almost sweet, with the scent of the small bakery on the corner drifting into the wind. I didn't mean to bring up the house again, but the moment I crossed paths with Mrs. Coughlin, the neighbor who hinted at the music, her face brightened as though she'd been waiting for me. "You settling in?" she asked, her tone deceptively casual. "We are," I replied. "Though the house has quirks." She gave a knowing smile, but her eyes softened with something like sympathy. "He was sensitive, didn't like chaos, loved order, routine. If you notice things moving or shifting, just put them back where you want them. He'll get used to you." The words felt bizarre and oddly comforting at the same time. "How do you know that?" I asked. "Oh, I lived next door for years. Heard him practicing, laughing with friends. He was loud, but he was kind. Houses remember people like that." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "You're not in danger. Just don't ignore him if he tries to get your attention." He wasn't the type who liked being overlooked. Before I could ask more, a friend of hers called out from across the street, and she shuffled off, leaving me with more questions than answers. When I returned home, something had changed. The mirror in the hallway, the one with the faint handprint, had turned slightly again. Not dramatically, not in a way that felt staged or aggressive. Just a small shift, almost like someone had paused to look at themselves in it, then adjusted its angle to catch more light. But what struck me wasn't the mirror's position, it was the handprint. It was clearer now, more defined. I crouched down and studied it, noting the delicate curvature of the palm, the long, narrow fingers. It wasn't frightening. It was almost elegant. My partner hadn't touched it. Neither had I. And yet it looked fresher, as though someone had placed their hand there only moments earlier. That evening, after dinner, we sat on the sofa trying to watch a movie, but the house made it impossible to relax. Not because of noise, quite the opposite. The silence felt sharpened, like the pause between two musical notes, waiting for the melody to continue. Every so often, the air would shift slightly. A faint warmth near the doorway, a cooler draft brushing past the back of my neck, the subtle sense of someone passing by just out of sight. Around 10 p.m., my partner excused themselves to take a shower. I stayed in the living room, scrolling through my phone, though nothing I read held my attention. My eyes kept drifting toward the staircase. The hum I'd heard the night before, it wasn't exactly a voice, but it wasn't mechanical either. It had the tone of something living, something expressive. I found myself listening for it again, like a person waiting for an answer to a question they haven't fully formed. Then it came, not a hum this time, but a soft shuffle of paper. The crisp sound of individual sheets being gently moved came from the study directly across the hall. I rose slowly, careful not to make the floorboards creak, and walked toward the half-open door. The room was dim, the lamp casting a small pool of light over the desk. And there, spread out across the surface, were our unpacked documents, receipts, letters, a few old photos we hadn't hung yet. Except now they weren't a chaotic pile. They had been arranged. Not perfectly, not with obsessive precision, but neatly, thoughtfully, like someone was trying to help tidy up. On top of the stack, perfectly centered, lay a single photograph we'd kept tucked in a folder. It was a candid shot of me and my partner taken years ago, standing in front of a seaside cliff, wind blowing our hair everywhere. We hadn't touched that picture since moving in. We hadn't even discussed where to put it. But it was laid out with care, as if gently presented to us. Something inside me shifted at that moment. Fear wasn't the strongest emotion. It was something else, something strangely human. The sense of being acknowledged. Not threatened. Not watched maliciously. Seen. The house wasn't pushing us away. It was asking who we were. For the next 2 days, the house behaved like a host trying to make a good impression. No sudden shifts, no strange footsteps, no unexplainable sounds. Even the temperature stayed steady, warm in the hallways, cool near the windows, as if whoever or whatever had been reaching out to us was waiting for our response. My partner noticed it too, though neither of us brought it up directly. There's an unspoken agreement couples form in strange homes. Don't acknowledge anything until the other person does first. On the third night, we broke the silence at the same time. We were brushing our teeth when my partner spoke through the mirror's reflection. You feel it too, right? There was no point denying it. Yeah, I do. Do you think it's him? I paused. The question held more truth than fear. I don't know, but I don't think it's dangerous. They nodded, and that simple acknowledgement changed the atmosphere between us. The fear that had been pushing us into separate corners of the house dissolved. Whatever was here, we would handle it together. Later that night, unable to sleep, we sat on the staircase halfway between the bedrooms and the music room. The house was quiet, but not empty. The air felt awake, listening, as though waiting to be invited into the conversation. And then the sound happened again, soft, deliberate, unmistakable. A single piano note, not the random, hesitant tones from before. This one rang out clearly, confidently, like the beginning of something practiced. We looked at each other, then stood up and walked toward the music room without speaking. The door, which we always left half-closed, was standing fully open. The room itself glowed faintly from the moonlight slipping through the skylight, illuminating dust particles drifting like slow snowflakes. The piano stool was pulled out again, but this time much farther positioned directly where someone would sit. And on the music stand rested a sheet of blank staff paper, completely empty except for one soft, clear fingerprint in the top corner. My partner whispered, "We're not alone." "But we never were," I said quietly. And then something happened that felt impossibly gentle. The air shifted just a subtle sweep, like the draft of someone passing between us. The dust stirred, moving in a small arc toward the piano, and the faint scent of cologne brushed past my face. Something warm, smoky, unmistakably vintage. The kind of scent you'd expect to linger on the sleeve of a performer's jacket backstage after a show. My partner reached out and rested a hand on the piano's edge. "If you're here," they said softly, "you can play. You're welcome." For a moment, nothing moved. The silence grew so deep it felt solid. Then, slowly, with a deliberate grace, one more note rang out. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't meant to startle. It was a response, a greeting. We sat on the floor across from the piano, leaning against each other, letting the house breathe around us. Something about the moment felt strangely comforting, almost sacred. The kind of quiet you experience in a chapel or after a concert ends, when the echoes still cling to the air and no one wants to break the spell. We stayed like that for a long time, until the room grew colder and the moon shifted away. Eventually we whispered goodnight and returned to the bedroom, though we left the music room door open as if closing it would be rude. The days that followed blended into a strange but peaceful routine. We stopped flinching at small sounds. The house's presence became part of the daily rhythm. A chair slightly moved, a faint hum near the hallway, a whisper of scent that didn't belong to us. We began to treat these things not as intrusions but as signs of company. Neighbors noticed the change in us. One afternoon, while walking home with groceries, Mrs. Coughlin watched us approach and smiled, deeply and knowingly, like someone seeing an old melody return to life. "He's settled with you now," she said simply. "He always stayed where he felt understood." Her certainty didn't bother me anymore. That evening, while my partner cooked dinner, I wandered upstairs with a quiet curiosity. The music room felt softer than before, warmer. I sat in front of the piano, resting my fingers lightly on the cool keys. I didn't expect anything supernatural. I wasn't trying to summon anything. I just sat there, appreciating the quiet. And then, as I shifted slightly on the stool, a faint vibration traveled through the wood, like the lingering echo of a chord someone had played just moments earlier. It wasn't frightening. It wasn't even surprising. It felt like acknowledgement and unspoken understanding between the past and the present. A gentle reminder that this house, with all its history and sound and memory, wasn't haunted in the way people feared. It was inhabited, And as long as we treated it with respect, as long as we listened, it would continue to hum softly around us, carrying the traces of a voice that once shook the world. A voice that wasn't ready to disappear. A presence that, in its own quiet way, had found a home again.